Can everybody hear me? Because I'm usually not mic'd up. I'm usually not mic'd up, and I have to remember to speak normally rather than project, which I usually do when I'm lecturing. So my name is Dr. Simone Stumpf. I'm from City University of London, and I'm here to talk to you about designing the UX for a healthcare system. Now, I'm not going to show you the interface. So I'm literally going to talk to you about how we went about designing. So it's focusing much more on the method for developing the healthcare system that we're hopefully going to launch next year and the year after. All right, okay. So what I'm going to cover is a toolkit called Scampi, and I apologize about the name. Professor Neil Maiden came up with it. He's really good at this. And it stands for Self-Care Advice Monitoring, Planning and Intervention. The idea is that we're developing this toolkit to enable people with dementia and Parkinson's initially to lead a better quality of life. Can I get you to use that instead? Sorry. Okay, right, I'm using that instead. So the idea is that we want to maintain their quality of life, and we're giving them this toolkit to actually develop a quality of life plan for them that works for them. Once they have established this plan, we are going to monitor it with sensors, also self-reports, and we're leveraging AI to actually ensure that they can maintain that quality of life in the future. So as I said, we're focusing on dementia and Parkinson's disease initially, but potentially this could work for other conditions, for other healthcare situations as well. So rather than explain to you in detail what the vision is for this toolkit, I'm just going to show you a short video. It's about 2 minutes that hopefully gets you thinking about what we're actually trying to achieve. So hopefully that's going to work.
Jane lives at home. She has early dementia. Jane knows what she wants from life right now. She has her favourite activities and priorities, but these can change over time. Communicating these shifting priorities to carers and relatives can be difficult, and wordy care plans can impede rather than help communication. The Scampi visual care planning tool can give Jane more control over decisions and priorities regarding her life and care at home. With Scampi, Jane can use an everyday tablet to describe, in simple and visual forms, what she wants from her care and her life. In return, the visual care plan will make specific suggestions to Jane about how she might adapt her life to achieve the qualities that she wants. Scampi can even help her discuss these adaptations more easily with her carers. Simple and unobtrusive sensors around Jane's home will connect with her personal care plan to discreetly monitor how well her plan is being achieved. For example, a simple movement sensor picks up her leaving the house to go out or into the garden, to provide feedback about her physical activities. If needed, Scampi will recommend simple changes so that Jane's wants and preferences are met more effectively. Jane is empowered to make decisions about her own life and to discuss them with her relatives and carers without frustration. And Scampi's visual care planning will be designed so that Jane and people like her can afford it. For more information on Scampi, please contact the project team at enableselfcare.org.
Except don't contact us on that. I'm not too sure if it's set up yet. But you can email me And hopefully that gave you an overview of what we're trying to achieve. This is the timeline that we have for this project. So it's over 36 months, which started in March this year. And currently what we're doing, we are in the phase of researching and co-designing this technology with potential users of this toolkit. So what I'm going to talk to you about is this first phase that we're currently in. And mind you, this is going to go on for another 6 months or so. So this is really just a snapshot of where we are, and I'll be focusing much more about the methods rather than the outcomes of what we're doing. And hopefully you can take something away for your own projects about how we're approaching this. So what I mainly want to focus on is how we traditionally involve the user and how we're doing it in Scampi. So you all hopefully are familiar with the user-centered design process, right? And that usually works by conducting lots of user research. You go out, you interview people, you observe them, you might do some questionnaires, and typically you do lots of it, ideally, right? Both qualitative and quantitative data that flows back into the project. Typically, one of the deliverables that you would do as part of user-centered design is you would create personas. You might develop these design personas to then take into design. You give it to a designer or you use them in a design team setting to create your design, right? Hopefully, at one point, you have designed a solution and you bring the users back into evaluating whatever you designed. So everybody familiar with that kind of process? I hope, I'm not teaching you anything new. That probably is the way that you're operating typically, right? I'm also not going to talk very much about personas. Hands up with the people who are not familiar with personas. Good, otherwise I would have said, come and see me after class. The focus is on involving the users as much as possible during that design process to hopefully create this product or the service or whatever you're designing in a way that turns out to be useful to them. As part of Scampi, we're actually not really using the traditional user-centered design process. What we're doing is we are using something called co-design or participatory design, particularly in the early phase of the project. So what we are doing is we are literally getting people, potential service users, into a team that helps us design the solution, right? So what you're switching there is that we are dealing with a small number of people, typically sort of between 4 to 6 people in a workshop, rather than the user-centered approach where you would actually try and go out and talk to many more people, right? So we have to adapt some of the processes that we are using from user-centered design to co-design. So how do we do that? Well, we figured out that personas are actually really, really, really useful, right? Because what they actually do is they represent target groups, right? The challenge you have with co-design is that it's really, really easy to go into the workshop, design something, and then it's only appropriate for those people that took part in the co-design workshop. So you potentially have the problem that you're designing for 3, 4, 5 people, and it doesn't work for anybody else, right? So what we thought was, well, how can we actually use personas in a co-design setting? How can we achieve that? And there's actually very little currently being done on this. So from an academic standpoint, that is also very interesting, but also it can be incredibly useful for you, because how do you cut down the number of people that you need to talk to while still leveraging personas and some of the good features about user-centered design. One of the ways that you can integrate personas into co-design is through something called the swim technique. So someone who isn't me. And that has been used successfully in a previous project used at City University of London with people with aphasia. So they were brought into co-design workshops, and they were told, well, what about this technology? Imagine this technology for someone who isn't you, right? And that was actually relatively successful. There are particular problems with applying this technique with various user groups, but it has been tried before. What has also been tried before is to literally bolt on personas to the co-design process, but in a way which meant that designers or user researchers were still going out, talking to lots of people, developing these personas, and then literally injecting them into the co-design workshops fully prepared. So they were presented to the co-design participants, and they were told, here's another persona, what do you think of that? So what we are actually trying to do is co-create personas with the co-design participants. Right? And the way that we achieved this, or hopefully have achieved this, is by running the co-design workshops. And we have a series of 4 co-design workshops with 2 different groups, so 8 in total, 4 each. And we have a group that focuses on Parkinson's disease. We have 6 participants in them, no carers involved at all. And we have another group that is mainly focusing on people with dementia. So we have 4 people with mild to moderate dementia, and each one of those had an informal carer. I think one of them actually also had a formal carer. And the way that we developed these personas was through something that I call the queue approach. And the queue approach is because the process looks a little bit like a queue, where we have a short iteration where we develop the personas, and then the sort of little queue stroke where we validate it. And the iterative approach is where we select facets of a persona that we want to flesh out. We then do various exercises to draw out these facets individually as they make sense to participants. So we draw on their lived experience for them to tell us, this is what matters to me, this is what I'm like. And then we actually use that material as points for reflection to then co-create the persona. So they actually stand back and say, okay, this is how this would apply for a persona, which we called a stand-in, right? So let me explain a little bit more how we did that in detail. So we did that over 2 workshops. Workshop 1 was focusing more on co-creating the personas, and workshop 2 was more about validating the personas, making sure that they were actually right. So in workshop 1, we focused on 3 facets that we know matter in our technology. One is the background, what are these people like? Another facet is, well, how are they using technology and how is their home set up? Because we want to install sensors as well and leverage technology that they are actually comfortable with. And then the final facet is, well, what goals or tasks or activities do they actually want to do? What kind of things that they want to support with? So for facet 1, we literally just asked them, well, what about you? Give us a little introduction. And so we went around the table, everybody talked about themselves, and then we asked them to step back and say, okay, what about a stand-in that isn't here? What background do they have, right? In the technology of home, we asked them to tell us about the home environment individually. So we gave them a floor plan, and they were telling us what technology they used where or what they were doing in different rooms. So we had a good understanding what each and every one of them did. And then, again, we asked them to stand back and say, okay, what technology would this persona use, right? So you can see that we use this sort of iterative process quite a lot. We always asked about them first, and then the personas were grounded in their experience. In workshop 2, we just went back and kind of checked with them, okay, this is what you told us, this is what you told us about the personas, how do they mesh? So we were able to prompt them, do you want to adapt the persona? Do you want to change anything? Does this make sense? Okay, at this point, I probably have to say a little bit about the personas. And in total, we developed 5 personas, 2 for the Parkinson's group and 3 for the dementia group. And when I said we developed them, it was mainly the participants who developed them. So let me introduce you to these personas. So Pat and Stephen were 2 personas these people created for people with Parkinson's. So Stephen is 64 years old, he has Parkinson's, he's married, he's a retired fashion designer, and he has a beer fridge. That's one of his technologies, right, that he's really proud of. And also, it gives you a little clue what his goals are. It's to drink beer. Pat, on the other hand, is a 53-year-old divorcee. She is really focused on her career. She's actually an executive in the NHS. And she doesn't have any time for hobbies. All she gets round to is a little bit of Pilates now and again. And her life is stacked full of technology. I mean, she has the smart home already set up, right? The people in the dementia group constructed 3 different personas. So there's Fred, Vera, and Enid. So Fred is a 60-year-old retired train driver, and he was diagnosed with cognitive impairment some years ago. He enjoys walking his dog. I think actually he also likes to go and sneak off to the pub while he's walking his dog. And Vera is his wife, his informal carer. And not only does he have a wife, Vera, he also has Enid, his daughter, who lives in Miami, and she is a little bit a lady who lunches. So she has swanned off to Miami, but she still keeps in touch with Fred now and again, Skyping with him, and so on. So these are the personas that were constructed, and literally all we did as part of the project was tidy them up and make them look nice, right? All of the rest was actually constructed by people there themselves. So what worked and what didn't work, right? So we actually were really, really pleased that we ended up with these personas, right? But are they actually useful? And I have to say that they actually are. They allowed us to do certain things. First of all, they were incredibly fun to co-create. And not just from my perspective, actually from the people there. They were coming out and really went to town on some of the aspects, really creative work, right? And really fun work. I don't think, I mean, there was a lot of laughter around the room. There was a humor there that was incredibly useful to leverage for some of the other more boring work that we're doing. So in that sense, we managed to engage the co-design participants in that task, which can be a little bit boring. We also found them really useful in the co-design activities since then. So they allowed the participants to actually step outside their own needs and consider other people, how other people might react to this technology that we want to introduce. So they were useful in providing this objectivity that you sometimes need as a designer to consider whether something might work or whether it is useful or how it might integrate into the sort of processes that are already there. Representation beyond the workshop participants. It worked and it didn't work. So one of the things that you might have noticed is that for the people with dementia, we created this whole family, right? In the dementia group, there were people with dementia there and their carers, and we have that in the personas. But we also suddenly have Enid there, the daughter. And so they were able to create these personas that were outside of their immediate participation. So in that sense, it worked. When we flipped over to the Parkinson's side, they only created a sort of representative sample of who was already participating in the co-design workshops. However, what we were able to do, we actually sneakily introduced Vera and Enid to the Parkinson's participants. So they now have this extended network as well. So, you have to just think a little bit about how do you represent who is there and do you need more personas than they're actually there. We have extreme personas. So Pat was actually not very representative of people who were at that workshop. She was the one that has all of that technology. If you asked the people there, they were like, no, I don't have a smart home system. I don't have all of that technology that Pat has. But that was actually quite good to push the boundaries of our design, to imagine what this might actually be like in 5 or 10 years' time when perhaps everybody has it. One disadvantage was that because these personas were co-created with the participants, they all know what it is like and what needs they have living with Parkinson's or dementia. So there was a lot of shorthand in the personas, right? If you're attuned to the needs and the limitations, perhaps, of people with Parkinson's and dementia, this is obvious to you. If you were to give these personas to a designer who had no idea what these people are like, what they need, what limitations they have, what abilities they have, they wouldn't be able to generate that themselves. So you might have to do a little bit of work to make it more obvious for people outside of the know. And we noticed that quite a lot of these personas are aspirational. That's where they want to be. It's not necessarily where they are, right? So you always have to double check and validate them to make sure that they don't go sort of off into the distance and put something in which actually isn't really connected to the lived experience. So what's next in our project? Well, we're currently designing the user interface based on these personas as well. We are going to come up with our last co-design workshop, so we're going to use the personas again in validating the user interface. We're going to be looking for more involvement of various users or potential users before we build the system. And then hopefully at some point next year, we're going to go into a field trial. So I just want to wrap up by saying thanks to our participants who created the process, helped us a lot in designing the UX of that. And then a whole host of other people at City, but also beyond. So hopefully you found that useful. Hopefully you can take some of those ideas and integrate it into your own practice. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes. I can project. Yes, Adam, I can project.
Hello, I'm Ben. Thank you very much. That was very informative. I didn't quite get the full understanding of the queue process. If you could go into that in any more detail, that would be amazing.
Okay. So let me just flick back. The queue process basically is this highly iterative phase of drawing on somebody's experience, right? So we draw out what is it like for them, and then we circle around and kind of use that as a prompt for thinking about someone who isn't them, right? So, and this is actually, you know, a sort of highly iterative phase where we go from facet to facet to facet, right? So we cycle around, and then the queue, the little stroke at the end is the validation. So we don't just end up with these aspirational personas that actually have no connection to reality. So I think, you know, this validation step is actually really important. So that it actually is making sense checking that the personas are okay.
And how did you do that? Sorry, second follow-up question. The validation part was just to play back those personas or those aspects of those personas back to the group?
Yeah, so if you notice, we had some individual exercises, we had some group exercises. Something I didn't mention in there, we also gave them cameras so they could gather their own data. And in the second workshop, we brought all of that together. So we played back, okay, this is what you said through these exercises, through the photos and the diaries that you sent in. And then we compared that data to the personas and kind of went, do you want to adjust, right? Is there anything missing in the personas? Or do you want to scale back the personas? So it was that process of, again, validating their lived experience with the personas. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
Okay, can we thank Simone because we need to move on to our next speaker?